listening to the broadcast on the Vocalizer Network, the only show that covers all your favorite things, with your host, Justin Thomas.
What's going on, everybody? Justin Thomas here. I'm not going to be doing too many reviews on this channel, but this is one I'm making an exception for. This is The White Princess. It premiered April 16th on Starz. It's direct follow-up to The White Queen, which I was a big fan of, and I'm going to be discussing some broad strokes of the show and whether I think it's worth you guys checking out or not.
This is yours now, Henry. Your kingdom, your throne, and your wife.
All I have ever wanted was to marry a man for love. Well, now I have no choice.
God put my Henry on the throne.
And God put my daughter on the throne beside him.
My mother has decided on a motto for you.
Humble and penitent, you would do well to abide by it.
You think you have free will in this?
These are different times, and we must learn to change or die.
I have learned a way to win. I will pretend to be a dutiful wife, but I will fight them and they will not even know it.
Unrest is breaking out.
Some of your soldiers are changing sides.
Changing sides to who, though? Don't be fooled by her. She's quite the politician.
Lizzie doesn't lose. She always finds a way to win.
Would you push him from the throne?
Elizabeth will strike. Cut off the head, and the snake will die.
Humble and penitent be damned. Hidden and patient. That will be my motto.
All right, if you've ever read any Philippa Gregory books or you have seen The White Queen, you will know that that trailer right there kind of really just screams Gregory's style in the themes of her novels and shows, and that is strong women. These women that she writes about, usually 13th and 14th century, are actual historical figures, and their stories, for the most part, are actually true. And these are some very amazing, inspiring, strong women that, in a time that it was hard to be a woman at all, overcame huge hurdles and, persevered and had so much strength and overcame a lot. So some really cool stuff. All these series, both these series, The White Queen in 2013, and this is technically a sequel to that. The White Princess is Lizzie York, Elizabeth York's daughter. So it actually takes place less than 24 hours after the last scene that we see in The White Queen. So again, this is historical fiction, but it is a little bit closer to history than like shows like The Tudors or Reign or stuff like that. So I will be just talking about some minor spoilers, but not really anything in depth as far as plot points. That I want to cover is what I thought was done well and what I thought wasn't done well, and really just overall expectations I have for this show after my first viewing, which I just did a quick view. I didn't take notes or anything. But pretty much I got enough to know if I would recommend it or not, and there's a lot to place into this. The first thing I want to point out is, even though the War of the Roses was technically over, this was a really turbulent time in history. In the previous miniseries that, like I just said, was a screen adaptation of Gregory's novels, The White Queen, that took place during the height of the War of the Roses and ended with the Battle of Bosworth, where Henry Tudor defeated Richard of York and became the last English king to win his crown on the battlefield. Nobody's done that since. I will say that right off the bat, I actually really enjoyed The White Queen, and I probably, to be honest with myself, enjoyed it more than most. And I was very happy when I heard the announcement that this series was in fact set to go into production. But I also had my doubts about this series and how it would even measure up against the previous series. And that's a little frightening when, like I said, I have to be honest and consider that The White Queen was not universally praised by any means. I mean, nobody hated it. The critics are decent with it, but it wasn't a huge hit. There's not a huge fandom for it, but history buffs like me and people that love this historical fiction tend to enjoy it. But I did really enjoy it. I've watched it multiple times. But you have to consider, and I have to consider, that the War of the Roses, which it had been set during, is something that people were far more aware of even. And these days, things like Game of Thrones, who have really shined a light on it when they do the historical connections. And most, even if you've had like a history course recently, you should be aware of the broad strokes of the time, very least the major events. And also, like Game of Thrones and Vikings have created a new demand for these period films and shows. But even though the aftermath of the events that occur in the first series are fascinating and very important to English society, or at least they are to me, they're certainly not as action-packed, like I said, or universally known throughout popular culture. This is not 100% true to the historical period, but is also true enough to the events. It certainly doesn't take liberties like past shows like The Tudors or Reign still take. It's looking like it's going to be covering the events immediately following Bosworth that ended the War of the Roses, and I noticed just a couple red flags before I even saw the first episode that I'll give you really quick. One, they're replacing, and they have replaced, the entire cast. And the cast of the White Queen was magnificent in my opinion, but this is something that also is to be expected since these are technically miniseries, not an ongoing show. So, and they were also on the fence about even making this follow-up. So that makes contracts near impossible to obtain, especially if you're looking to get the full cast. And I'm sure certain actors were more than happy to reprise their roles, but the likelihood of all former casts returning is close to zero. So it would be even worse, in my opinion, and way more noticeable if they kept some and replaced others. I also worried about how they would handle this important time, as I said before, but not necessarily a time that shares the same entertainment value that the years of the actual War of the Roses provided. So I wondered if it would still stay as true as these shows do to history, or if it would manipulate the time to create, a more exciting series, which would turn me off to it at least. I'll just be doing a very simple, straightforward review. And the first thing I'm going to mention is the show was literally just almost lining up the reoccurring characters and announcing their names as Henry greets his court. Now, they're obviously recasted, as I've already mentioned, but this isn't necessarily a bad way to identify the returning key players from the series, but the key players are simply announced and not necessarily made clear why they are people of note, and they're just kind of paraded through short shots along with a slew of other characters that have a role to play in the upcoming story, so in real history. And I know this, but I'm a huge fan of the series, so I do know who all these people are. But in general, I feel like they have set this up as a completely new show in every way possible. But when the viewers need to have something explained in order to understand the significance of the actions taking place in this series, in this very episode, this is at least what I'm seeing, they seem to assume that everybody has watched or is either a reader of the books or have seen documentaries and have read source material about this time. I assure you that is not likely. A lot of people don't know much about Henry VII. A lot of people know who Henry VIII is, and they think the War of the Roses happened and Henry VIII popped out of thin air and started killing wives right off the bat. And that's, that is understandable if you're not obsessed with history. This is technically a very important time and all that, but it doesn't have the appeal that the War of the Roses have. So I think it's a little bit of a risk for these creators and this is just the first episode, but this is what I'm seeing. So this is what I'm telling you. It seems like they are assuming too much right off the bat. They're assuming we know who all these people are and their motives and, what had just happened exactly. I don't like a lot of expedition either. Sometimes you just got to drop some info. So for the general audience, especially if they're looking to bring in new people. So the scenes I'm talking about are focused around historical events and are a very important aspect of Henry's reign. And in his first act as a king, 36 Hours, you see Henry literally rewrote history and had recorded the date of his reign to begin one day before the Battle of Bosworth. And he submitted this to Parliament, so it was official. And this might not seem like a big deal, but you need to consider that this made everybody who fought for the king at the time, Richard, against Henry, that made them not just, not looked upon in a great manner, but this actually made them guilty of treason. So this was used to purge those who he thought to be a threat, not only from court, but from the world, and award lands to those who he considered allies and had alliances with for the Battle of Bosworth. This didn't go over well with the people of England even at the time, and this is a great example of how shaky of a claim he really had to the crown. And this brings us to what appears and is it should be the main focus of the series and was addressed in the previous series, and that is the marriage to Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Elizabeth Woodville, who is the main protagonist in the first series. This marriage is another way he attempted to rid any question of his legitimacy. But here's where I think the real issues start, for me at least. Number one, first-time watchers that are not necessarily familiar with this period are not going to understand the importance of these actions, which is a huge issue since it focuses on the arranged marriage, in which the extreme measures taken by Henry's mother and Elizabeth's mother that we see in the first series are not made clear. And the bigger issue is they seem to rely on that knowledge being known by the viewer, but the real kicker is here, if they are lucky enough, and I don't think they are, and a majority of those watching are familiar with the relationships of these real historical figures, or the characters, at least from the previous story, it's almost worse, in my opinion, because they've changed the behaviors and the relationships of these people. And remember, this is only a day after the events of the finale. In the case of Henry, this is the worst example of this. He is so vastly different in every way from the previous portrayal. He's unrecognizable. It's very difficult to adapt to this, at least for me. Lizzie York is not too much different, but the situation that she is portrayed to be in is more than slightly jaded. Her relationship with Richard of York, the former king that was just killed by Henry, her new husband, was a rumored lover that in real life and in the past series, and her uncle, by the way, which is really glossed over in this series, at least for the first episode. But they make a point to stray from the questionable circumstances of this short-lived relationship and present it as a loss of a true lover. This, it's really interesting. Less than 2 weeks ago, a funeral was held in England for Richard of York. Where they found his body in a car park, buried, and he had been villainized by the Tudors for the reasons that I told you a minute ago, that they had a real shaky claim, a very loose claim to the throne. So they needed to do everything they could. I mean, this is just like our modern day media. They needed to spread some misinformation, and they did. I mean, that's why Shakespeare wrote him as having this hunchback and he's just this horrible man. So I'm not saying that they should do that either, but they did address, at least in the first series and in history, it is questioned his actual intent, that if he was using her as a political ploy. I'm talking about Richard. So it seems that they are setting this series up because it's this arranged marriage that she is so against, and she was so in love with the perfect guy, Richard. And they, again, just aren't mentioning any of the, cons, which it's another example of them expecting you to be aware of the circumstance, but then ignore the circumstance when it's beneficial for them. So Michelle Farley, who is most known for playing Catelyn Stark, plays a role of Henry's mother, Margaret Beaufort, who was a religious fanatic and one of the most interesting characters in the first series and in real life as well. I won't say that they changed her too much. This first episode portrayed her as more of this vindictive, ill-intended she-wolf and downplayed her true root of her unwelcoming, bizarre, and obsessive behavior, especially when it comes to her relationship with Henry. And I know it's not a popular thing to say, and I'm not trying to nitpick it, but sadly, Farley's performance falls flat, especially after the previous performance. And that was a truly fascinating character in the first series and in real life. But just even if you're looking at it from just the first series, which again, they expect you to know, that actress just really nailed it. And she's not a likable person, but she isn't she's a fanatic. She's a just religious fanatic, and this drives her. She believes God. He believes Henry should be king, and this drives her. This just very unusual and unhealthy relationship with almost everybody around her. But it seems that they're portraying her as just, everybody seems to be simplified a lot. There's not as much depth in these characters. They're just plain evil or plain good. So there's no in between, which doesn't make for good TV. But I know it's a tough place for a performer to be what is always seems to be an uphill battle, to be playing a role that is used to seeing another actor in. But last but not least, the White Queen herself, Elizabeth of York, Elizabeth Woodville, depending on your view on the topic. And I know I'm going to seem like that person just going to hate anybody that isn't the original actor, but Rebecca Ferguson was far more appealing than Essie Davis, who plays the role currently. And it could be the writing, but the magical aspect that the Woodvilles are portrayed to obtain in both the series and real life, it came off far less silly and creepy than it did, at least for the first episode. She seemed to be like a crazy homeless woman other than a former queen. So I honestly can't say I enjoy any of the performances more than the previous ones. And the main storyline is built around the forced marriage, which is comprised of a pure evil, sociopathic Henry that doesn't resemble the Henry from the first series at all. I mean, he was not portrayed. I mean, this is he's the polar opposite. I don't know what's going on with it. And I mean, I'm not saying that it's not possible that he was like that in real life, but again, they're counting on you to be aware of the first series. And then they're just, this guy became just the worst person in the world in a day, other than this person that we rooted for all of the prior 10 episodes. So Lizzie of York, who has shown herself in the first episode to be pretty resemblant of who she was in the first series to a point, other than the actual relationship that she had with Margaret Beaufort and Richard. They seem to be going for, she's shown herself that, she's resilient and strong. She even does this in public at a time when a female queen or no queen could easily find herself without a head for no good reason. And all this does follow the theme of the series and these women in true life. But in the previous series, it was done far more subtle and without making everyone else a villain from a comic book. I do like where they're going with that, but it's too heavy-handed. Henry can't just have flaws. Henry is just a sociopathic maniac. Margaret can't just be a religious fanatic, that obviously is not very sociable or good with people. She has to just be like the new Mad Queen. And Elizabeth Woodville, the former White Queen, they can't just kind of imply that they could have some type of supernatural gifts. They have to make her seem like a Disney character or Wizard of Oz, whatever. I'm not buying it. It felt, the performances were flat, the writing was bad, and overall I found the episode far too heavy-handed with the setup of the main storyline. It's depending on us to have watched the separate miniseries to understand what's at stake and the importance of characters, and depend on us to accept drastic changes in these same characters. The first one didn't do too good, even though I highly recommend The White Queen. But they have a time period that left no lack of action and interesting events and characters to portray. And they can't try to have it both ways, especially with an insuperior cast in a period that, although hardcore history buffs like myself find interesting, the average viewer will most likely not share our enthusiasm for the show even before seeing it. So my final thoughts are, doesn't have as good of a cast. The writing is not good at all, at least for the first episode. Very heavy-handed. It's either laziness or just being unorganized because they want to have it both ways. They depend on you to remember what happened in the first series, but also forget what happened when it's convenient for them and serves their narrative. So overall, I just can't really even recommend it at all. I will probably watch the next episode, and if it has all these same issues, or even most of them, I won't even watch the third. And I can't recommend it because if you're looking at the casual viewer, the person that just, likes Game of Thrones and stuff, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this whatsoever. I mean, that's great. If you're just looking for some sword fights and some action, this is not going to, I think they might have one rebellion that they're going to show that happened, but there's not going to be a lot of, or any large action pieces. It's all going to be internal issues within his court and his mission to secure his place as king and legitimize the Tudor name. I guess maybe if there's one interesting thing, even the Tudors got this right, that, King Henry was shown to surround himself with, Henry VIII was shown to surround himself with people that didn't have noble blood, and it's brought up in the Tudors. And again, this is not usually a show you go to for accurate historical references, but it is true to a large point that Henry VIII did surround himself with low-born people because he didn't want all the other people that had Plantagenet blood and stuff. He had a little bit, but that's the whole reason that Henry VII, who we see in this series, is marrying Lizzie York, is because she has Plantagenet blood. Plantagenets ran England up until the Tudors came in. So it doesn't appeal to the casual viewer, and it would be confusing and probably frustrating having it both ways. Technique that they're using, he achieved his crown. He became king in the most badass way, and he's the last person to do it in the battlefield. But he didn't have a very badass reign. Yeah, I can't recommend it. So, because if you are a history buff like myself, you're going to find it a little bit insulting if it continues like it is. And if you're a casual watcher, there's not a lot of entertainment value in it for you. So it's probably not worth it. I wouldn't say don't watch it if you are curious, but in no way can I say, yeah, you guys have to see it. I don't think that you're risking much by skipping this one. Thank you again. I'm Justin Thomas, and make sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like I said in the last few videos, we are trying to build the YouTube channel, not the podcast. So every subscriber helps that, so we can get our analytics up and we can start putting more production value into it. I appreciate it so much. And worst case scenario, I'm wrong on this and I end up getting a show I like, but I'll watch one more. I'm pretty sure I'm right. You guys have a good one.